I met our next speaker 12 years ago in Ohio while I was studying jewelry and metals at the Cleveland Institute of Art. I was introduced to Todd by my now wife, Pam. She took an internship at a local custom jewelry shop and told me about this guy who could repair any mistake that she made. She thought we should meet. We had a lot in common right off the bat. He had long hair, wore a leather jacket, and rode a motorcycle. I had short hair, no leather jacket, and did not ride a motorcycle. We both, however, were at the beginning stages of finding our way in the world of jewelry and art. Since that time, he has taken on many roles as a custom jewelry designer, repair specialist, gallery owner, public demonstrator, instructor, artist, and all-around adventurer. His work is now widely available across the United States and can be seen here locally at Vicheri Jewelry Art Gallery. This year, he is the recipient of the Mort Abelson New Designer of the Year Award, one of the most prestigious awards handed out in the industry. Witnessing his transformation from a commercially employed bench jeweler to successful, independent, full-time studio artist is nothing short of inspiring. Please give a round of applause and help me welcome Todd Pownell.
Thank you, Seattle Metals Guild, and I'd like to also personally thank Kirk for asking me to come and also for that gracious introduction. So I was asked to share my story and the story of our studio and how we started and began and found our way, made our way, and the intersections that happened during building our studio and where we find ourselves today. So I've titled my lecture today, Live Work, Finding Our Studio's Stride. So I grew up, I think, pretty much like any red-blooded American boy would have wanted to, riding and racing dirt bikes. So on the weekends, I would go beat myself up on this, and during the week, I would wrench away. So what happened as a young man is my mind became ingrained in the thinking that metal was hard objects used in a mechanical way. Gears and handlebars and foot pegs and needed lubrication, all of this. So I became totally ingrained in my mind as a young man. That is until I was fortunately exposed to a very, very well-equipped high school shop class. And there, I was able to melt metal for the first time. So, that experience, I always say, was the beginning of my career, because it felt like I really looked into the abyss, and the abyss looked back when I found out that metal could be poured and malleable and made into then other objects instead of fixed objects. I also got the opportunity to melt aluminum there, do foundry work, and then I started exploring working with copper and non-ferrous metals, and started to work on a smaller scale. And then upon leaving high school, honestly, I didn't have too much guidance. But I was able to find a technical school in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, known as Bowman Technical School. And pretty much against everybody's best advice, even my high school guidance counselor, I went ahead and enrolled. And I want to tell you what's interesting about Bowman Technical School. It was founded by a guy named Jacob Bowman, and in the 1860s, 67 maybe. And what he was trying to do at that time was to circumvent or go around the apprenticeship program, which he found cumbersome and had many years of under the master. So what he implemented was these type of military-style calisthenics, if you will, teaching craft. So he did this for watchmaking, hand engraving, jewelry fabrication, stone setting, and even clock making. So I found myself at Bowman Technical School in 1987, and ironically, the curriculum was almost unchanged in a way. So I found myself doing things like filing cubes by hand. I had to learn, my first soldering I had to learn was a blowpipe with an alcohol lamp. So I had to literally learn circular breathing like a trumpet player to get that flame to just stay on the object. It was completely absurd and archaic, But it was working. And when we moved to the torch, I remember one of the gauntlet exercises was to take a sterling silver fork and cut one of those 4 middle prongs off at the base, and then cut it into 4 more sections, and then rebuild it as if it wasn't, you didn't mutilate it. So the reason this worked is because I was not learning, as I say, through my head at all, but I was learning everything through my fingertips. So all the knowledge was coming to me through my fingertips. So even though it was archaic and strange, it somehow strangely worked for me. Jacob's son was named Ezra F. Bowman, and he continued the school, and under him it became quite famous for hand engraving. And the graver you see on the left here is known as the Ezra F. Bowman graver. And I spied it in Laura's shot of some of her old tools, so that was kind of nice. The reason it became famous at that time, it was in the 1930s, is because Hamilton Watch Company was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And there was a great demand for engraved pocket watches and wristwatches that America was still producing at that time. So Bowman became very, very famous for the top engravers in the country at that time, and they wrote several books on the craft and all of this. So I did not have I wanted to take the hand engraving course, but I was only able to do the jewelry fabrication and the stone setting courses. My funds ran out, but still to this day I have an affinity for hand engraving, and these are the gravers I still use today. And you can still find the Ezra Bowman gravers available like at Otto Fry if you look hard enough in the catalogs. And there's a few my pieces in progress, which I'll talk about a bit later. So then upon exiting Bowman, I immediately found a job in the field. So here in this picture, you can kind of still see some of the Bowman influences. Number one is I always worked on watchmakers' benches and converted them for my own jewelry purposes. I set stones with this engraver's block up here. It was my way of setting stones, using the engraver's block, and it was a very heavy, solid surface, and I could chase the stones in. So then, moving from repairs to then becoming the head stone setter, I became curious about the gemstones I was setting. Of course, there were gemstones that were worth $70, and there was gemstones that were worth $17,000 or even up. But that wasn't the main reason that I was curious, but that did spark some curiosity when they looked maybe similar to my untrained eye. Since I was becoming a stone setter, I really just became curious about the material the same way I was curious about the metal. So I wanted to know about the internal nature of gemology. So that compelled me to study gemology. And of course, yes, I was in Youngstown, Ohio, young 20-something, and I wanted to actually go out to Santa Monica and study gemology at GIA and have myself a nice West Coast adventure. But I had to be realistic, and I didn't have the means to do that either. So I enrolled in the home study course. And the home study course, just like Bowman, in a way worked for me. Because in those days I would do a 9-to-5 job setting stones, then I'd come home and I'd read about gemstones, and I would then put the gemstone under the microscope and look into them, and I had a refractive index tool where I could measure the light venting, and then I could submerge them in these specific gravity fluids. And so I became this recluse, this kind of solitary jewelry nerd in those days, working 9 to 5 and then being my little gemologist at night. And the gemology really, if I can do a pun, filled another facet for me, because in high school, I really enjoyed science class. And so the gemology at that time as a young man felt to me like a nice science class. So I enjoyed it, and peering into these gems they were so small, but it felt to me like peering into something vast. And I was searching for their identifying characteristics. So I was looking for inclusions like you see here, which are 3- and 2-phase inclusions that would be found in natural emerald. So this is what a gemologist would call the identifying factors. Not only that it's natural, but also that it's most likely Colombian emerald. So that's how I started my first steps into the field. But I also want to share you with the story of my now current wife, Deborah Rosen, many years before we met, and how she proceeded in starting her energy in the field of jewelry. So she started her studies at the Cleveland Institute of Art, and then one day they had a guest lecturer. And the guest lecturer was Yoko van Omen. And there was a gallery in DC previously to Jeweller's work was called VO Gallery, I believe. And she was a Dutch jeweler, and she gave a lecture upon the European jewelry scene. Upon hearing this, Deborah wanted to explore if she could get there. So after writing a few letters, she found herself exiting the bus station, or the train station, in Cologne, Germany. And here we have the Dome in Cologne, Germany. In Cologne, she found Peter Skubic to study under. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Skubic. For those of you who are not, he was a very, very early innovator in the field, and he was quite critically acclaimed for his constructivist style tension jewelry. So there she was under Peter Skubic in Cologne. But unfortunately, the school was plugging along, but then through some sort of bureaucracy, that school decided to switch gears. So Skubic went back to his Austria studio, and Deborah was left with a choice, either to maybe return, but she just didn't want to be done with this European experience that she was having. So after a difficult entrance exam, she found herself accepted in another program in Halle, Germany, in the former East. And I have to say, she brought me back to this location a few years when we were able to vacation, and I would have never left. It's a medieval castle sitting high on a hill, and it's looking over a river, and the grounds is like a square, and there's sculpture programs, and it is extremely, extremely beautiful. I would have never wanted to leave there when she showed me the grounds. And there, she found herself under the tutelage of Dorothea Prull. So Skubic was kind of a rebel. Dorothea, if I could say, is more of a contemplative jeweler, but still also very acclaimed in the field at that time. Her pieces were more meditative, more inspired by nature, but still very, very individually driven. So under those two different jewelry artists, and basically being fully immersed in the scene, Deborah participated in many peer group activities, including this, which was an exhibition with her work included called Cologne Gold. And this was at the Handwerk Museum in Cologne. Eventually, she came back to the States, fortunately for myself. She landed at the jewelry store now. I was in Beechwood, Ohio. That was a custom and high-end jewelry store. And she became the wax carver, model carver for some of these very prestigious rings we were making, and I, of course, was the stone setter. So this became like a very practical, pragmatic conversation where we would have to talk to each other about the waxes, because my job would be either difficult or easy based on how well the wax model was carved. But then it became more of a larger dialogue about what is jewelry in the larger world. And this obviously happened because of the two different backgrounds that I just described to you that collided in this jewelry store. So we started reading, based on some of our little larger philosophical questions that the dialogue became, some of the books that you see here. So we really devoured this Jewelry of Our Time book here and discussed it at length. But then, of course, at some point you're makers, right? So you have to leave the philosophy away and you make some stuff. So I wanted to give you an example of one of the early pieces I did that came out of that dialogue. You can obviously see the craft and this is the bicolor tourmaline that rotates. But you can now obviously see me vicariously kind of soaking up Deborah's European education. It's obviously a very constructivist form here. You can notice the inverted diamonds on the edge, but obviously today it's going to be for different reasons. And then, as the discussion softened, we started to ask different questions. Questions of how can we live our craft? How can we live these craft ideals that we've, and we kind of had our pulse on what was going on in Cleveland. At that time, there was a progressive councilman that got passed what was called the Live Work Ordinance. And this allowed developers to develop these old industrial buildings in Cleveland's core for live-work purposes. And we found the Loftworks building, which is where our studio is today. And I ended up acquiring, I was able to get a 1,300 square foot flat on the 3rd floor. This is how it looks today. But in the beginning, we built it out with separate little areas for wax carving, for my stone setting, and then for students and things. But now that we were set up, we needed to gain public awareness. So we started to poke our noses around. And what we found was there were small nonprofits in Cleveland called things like Cool Cleveland, Sparks in the City, Emerging Cleveland, and basically all these little organizations, what they were bus tours and things that would basically bring out-of-towners and suburbanites into the Cleveland core to see let them have a glimpse of what was happening inside of these old industrial buildings that would have otherwise been most likely torn down if they weren't developed. So here you can see I've put some safety glasses on these little girls, and mom and grandpa's watching on. And we were always very clever. We always gave away a silver ring when these tours came through Cleveland. But we also wanted that peer group. So we, of course, had guest artists come in, our peer group. And we always had, this is an acid etched workshop, but we did granulation. We did different workshops where other artists came in and taught a technique. So we always got professional jewelers as well as laymen. So it was another way to get this peer group going of the craft. And this was all under what we called tap studios, is what we had business plan. And so as we gained public awareness, people started finding us, and we started to do some commissions. So simple commissions that we were doing, mostly bands. And then, as they say, the proverbial light bulb went off, and we decided to mix our workshops and classes that we were running to, I thought, what better way to have the public gain appreciation of the craft than to put the tools and the metal in their hand. So we created a forge your own ring workshop for couples that came in. It was a 2-day workshop, and they started with fresh metal grain, and we always included them to use recycled materials or their own heirloom jewelry in the mix. And then the couples got to pour a nice bar, nice ingot. We got some hammers and tools in their hands. They got to swing some hammers and tools and make the metal denser. And then we always offered lunch in this 2-day workshop, and when it was nice in summertime weather, we were able to bring the couples up and not only share our craft lifestyle, we could then share our alternative urban lifestyle too, and share our city of Cleveland. And after 2 days of nice work, the couples ended up with very well-made bands from their own hands under instruction. And we gave them a nice champagne toast at the end. We also took pictures of them during the whole thing. And I have to say, this may look very simple, simple connection, and a nice, just kind of a romantic experience. But it was a bit more than that. We found that the couples that found us for this, although they came from different professions, different backgrounds, different ages, they're all different types of people. But we found a common theme between the people that found us. And we found that all the couples that came shared a genuine, authentic curiosity about where things came from in the world, and they just had a bit of more compassion about the world around them. And that was an important thing for us to feel, because we were always driven by sharing the craft, sharing the knowledge. And these were people that were not driven by a service-based economy. They were driven by this experience-based economy. So it was doing what we were trying to share. We also did one more thing. We cross-pollinated with other arts. Here we have a quartet in their first season that is called Les Délices, and they do music of the French Baroque. And we hosted their first season in our loft. So we had a harpsichord lugged up in our space, and we had this subculture of music, people that appreciated this music. So this was a craft in itself. So we were cross-pollinating this kind of these disciplines, and it really worked. Because of course we had jewelry out; they would see the tools, and this raised. We were tapping into more of a subculture that we felt would be enriching for us also. So this cross-pollination for our audience. So then Tap Studios was kind of doing what we wanted. Tap Studios was kind of picking up a little bit of speed. And we were sharing our knowledge, but we also wanted to get the audience outside of their comfort zone a little bit. So we decided to open up what we called Gallery M in tandem with Tap Studios. And our mission statement with Gallery M was to give young emerging artists, emerging out of the field, a stage to exhibit their work. We also wanted to do this outside of kind of a academic or a white-walled gallery approach, just the way we were doing with Tap Studios, trying to get around a storefront approach really to our craft in more of a shared nature. So Gallery M was then running in tandem as just an exhibition gallery, and a bit to challenge the audience's thought and get more of that dialogue to the Cleveland audience. So a little bit out of their comfort zone. And the gallery was run kind of on a shoestring budget. Tap Studios was, we wanted to provide income, we wanted to get that business plan chugging along, but the Gallery M in tandem was more of to challenge the audience, give the stage to young audiences, and even though it was ran on what I would call a shoestring budget, we did it very professionally. And here you can see one of our early postcards in 2006, a show called Whiteout, where we showed Anya Kavarkas and Yevgenia Kakanovic as they were emerging in the field. So, and they've both gone on to professorships and very strong mid-career artists of their own. I also wanted to share with you one other postcard, because this was the only show I would say we had of mid-career artists during Gallery M's existence. And it was also quite a coup that a gallery so young could pull off Carl Fritsch and Andre Vipperman in our Cleveland, Ohio. So we were bringing, again, that European flavor to Cleveland, Ohio. And it worked. We got the crowds in. They were discussing the work, and it was attracting a lot of attention. And one of the shows that we hosted that did make a small profit was the 200 Ring Show, where we partnered up with Velvet Da Vinci for the time that Snag came to Cleveland. And so we hosted the 200 Ring Show when it was in Cleveland. And I'm sure most of you, if not all of you in this room, recognize the lovely lady here and know Karen Lorraine and Fashiri. Well, she was one of those people that came through our gallery space and studio at that time. And now keep in mind, we had these showcases arranged front and center in the middle that kind of had a juxtaposition where it kept the crowds looking at the jewelry. But this is one big open loft. So we have the benches exposed in the corner. And so Karen's making her way around the space, and she kind of cleverly maneuvers her way into the workshop. And then we hear, and I'm showing some other people I think she might have been there with Gail Brown, and I think I was showing Gail Brown one of Kathy Buskahevich's rings that Kirk studied under. And then I hear, "Who made these?" So I kind of sheepishly go over to her, and she's looking at basically these 5 little rings on my bench that I had in kind of progress. And she grabbed my arm, and she kind of squeezed it a little bit. And she said, "I've been looking for you for 2 years." So that was a little scary, but it was a good thing. So long story short, Pasteri became the first gallery to show my actual jewelry work. So this is my brother Travis, and in 2008, we decided to do something. And the reason, my brother Travis is a ballroom dancer, and I, of course, am a jeweler gemologist. And in 2008, we found ourselves both at a similar point. We were still working in our fields, but we were both basically topped out with nowhere to go. I mean, I had tap studios going, me and Deborah had tap studios going, we had Gallery going, but I was still working in the field, and Travis was working at a dance studio, a ballroom dance studio, and we were running the show. There was nowhere else for us to go. So through our talks of me and Travis, we decided to quit our jobs in 2008 and do something epic. So we decided to quit cold turkey and go to Iceland, and we hiked from the top of the north part of Iceland all the way through Iceland to the southern part. It took us a month. So we planned a month. We had to mail provisions ahead and everything. So of course I was able to dream of William Morris's love of Iceland and all of this craft ideals that I have. But more importantly, I was able to decompress through this trip and find myself and re-energize. Because I didn't know 2008 the economy was going to collapse, but I knew, what I did know is that I had to return home and I had to get to work. I had to work to live now. So now I'm going to share some of the fruits of those labors now after my return. So, and a little bit of my jewelry work and how it has progressed. So here's some early rings that are oxidized sterling with 24 karat. And the 24 karat is quite thick. It's not like thin foil Kembu style. It's pretty thick piece. And then a mix of inverted diamonds. So the reason I'm inverting diamonds here, these are kind of night sky inspired, but I'm thinking like a gemologist. The reason I was turning the diamonds over was not in any way to be subversive or punkish, because I would get those questions, like, oh, the point's up, you better watch out when someone was, but it was no way meaning that. I was thinking of the path of light going through the pavilion instead of in the table, and now reflecting off of the table and creating one quick wink effect or broad flash effect. So I was getting twinkle, twinkle, little star instead of this kind of burning sparkle like the sun if they were set traditionally. This is an early piece I did, very tailored. But again, I'm thinking of the path of light here. So we have three inverted princess cuts in this kind of well-structured ring, and it's surrounded by highly polished white gold. And so, just like if you were walking through a city, or when I'm walking through a city, you look at the skyscrapers or something, and they reflect other buildings in them, they reflect the sky, and they create these mini kind of illusions to me. And so I was trying to create these mini illusions in this ring. So not only am I having the beam of light going through and hitting the pavilions and hitting the table and creating broad flash, but now I'm creating other illusions of diamonds at certain angles as the viewer peers into the ring. But those tailored forms, I like to mix little themes of order and chaos in my work. So the structure of this early neck piece then starts to break down here. So the cage is a bit askew now. The solder's left a little bit raw, and I've got this 24 karat gold sheet that's quite thick with the inverted baguettes. And now I have the reflection plate of white gold, shorter and with a serrated edge. And that shorter plate makes the illusion kind of stay more. If it was a little bit longer, the viewer would obviously see that it was not really, but this shorter reflection plate keeps that illusion alive in more range of the viewer. This was also a piece that I called, it was a very large brooch that I called Architectural Nest. And another theme in my work is I play with gatherings in a way that's kind of random. So I gathered these kind of hollow rectangular forms in a random way, grouping, and then inside that I inserted these high polished white gold reflection plates that couldn't be touched or anything, but then also with the 24 karat gold and the inverted diamonds. And you can't really see it in the slide, but if the viewer peers into it, it creates these illusions that look like they're going deeper in the brooch than the brooch should allow, because they're highly polished reflections. So a lot of the work is also dependent on the viewer viewing the piece rather than the wearer showing it off in a way. So it's a bit more on the viewer. This is more current work, very simple, oval, feminine forms. But again, the mosaics of the diamond, each diamond is just set with the gravers. Each earrings are set individually. So each pair of earrings, the mosaic comes out a little bit different. And again, we're giving that kind of broad flash of the diamonds, creating these sort of more of a mysterious look. A lot of times I say when my work is static, like laying on a table or something, and you walk by, the work kind of, the broad flash of the diamond kind of is more mysterious, and it kind of draws you in more than showing, the showing off of the wearer. It's more the movement of the viewer. I play with a lot of concave forms, obviously, for practical reasons, since I'm setting culet up. But also there's a similar color palette going on here. It's 18 karat, and then the black diamonds. So now with the black diamonds, I'm not getting any internal reflection. I'm just getting the oblique angles, creating a diamond reflection on this. Mosaic of baguettes, again in a concave form. The reason I do kind of tend to like baguettes or step cuts, rose cuts, old mine cuts, I like that. I'm going after that broad flash the same way I'm flipping stones over, the more of a broad flash of diamond rather than bling. So I do these cage diamond ring, and I want to share with you the impetus, if you will, behind these. And if you're familiar with what a diamond parcel is, or a diamond paper, or if you're not, it's a very cleverly folded rectangular piece of paper that you kind of unfold, and then the gems are held very cleverly inside. And I tell you, after all of these years of being a jeweler gemologist, I absolutely never get tired of opening one of those papers. It's like a little kiss every time you open it. And so I absolutely can't, I've always been surprised. So there's this desire that I had every time to just gather them up and kind of freeze with them. Sorry, like that. Freeze them. Okay, I'm a little close. Sorry. Still with me? Yeah. Sorry about that. So to kind of freeze them in place, I guess I got a little over dramatic in my excitement. And a lot of people ask, so that's kind of the thing with these. I'm trying to do that. That's and then I can't really control the shape of the cage, but I've never made one that I find uninteresting, because the cage itself then becomes this kind of gem with these kind of ghost facets. And a lot of people ask if they're jostling in there, but no, they're solid jammed in there, and the cages are quite strong because everything's just jammed together. So I can't really control the form of it, but I've never had one that I feel is uninteresting. So here's just another example of the caged pendant. So this is my newest direction. Continuing on the inverted diamond theme. But now the diamonds are, and again, some of the similar themes, the gathering of these marquees just kind of all together in a random mosaic. But now the diamonds are sitting just directly on the surface of this textured 18 karat. And I've laser drilled the diamonds, and each one is held with 2 tiny little platinum wires to the surface. So this creates kind of more drama, because everything's higher off the surface. It's literally almost, if I could say, what I caged before, now I'm setting free a little bit. So they look like they could just be dumped right off of that surface, but they're fixed in place. So that's the newest direction. And these I call the Iceberg Earrings. And so this is polished platinum now. And the diamonds, again, sitting, kind of floating immediately on the surface, held with those platinum wires just kind of magically on the surface. And even though stones are set very close together, the polished platinum kind of, again, acts like that previous white gold plate that when the viewer sees them, say if you have a black t-shirt on or something, this crackle effect between the stones will then reflect whatever's around it, but the diamonds will stay more white because they have a higher refractive index. So I get that kind of mosaic look as the viewer views them depending on what environment they're in. So to kind of sum up here, you get a nice mugshot of myself setting diamonds late into the night. But it's okay because me and Deborah are still collaborating our efforts and moving forward with our work, and we are growing. Here is two of our jewelers today. This is Megan and Shelley that we are super glad to have with us. Because now our vision is to build a team, a design team, and we want to continue to make it engaging for ourselves and interesting for all of our team, but we also always want to engage the audience too. So it's not only just about making the interesting objects, it's also making things to go out into the world and exist. So we continue to live our work and live in our Cleveland urban alternative studio home. And we are currently stretching our legs and we are finding our stride. So thank you very much.